Good morning. I'd like to get this meeting started. I know that Mr. Hibbard is somewhere in the building, but let's go ahead and get started with roll call.
Chair Sanders.
Here.
Vice Chair Hibbard.
Here.
Committee members Perez Andreessen,
Here.
Holt,
Here.
Keller, Louis,
Here.
Prince,
Here.
Roland,
Here.
and Tobias.
Here.
Thank you. And thank you to those joining us via Zoom. I know it's not easy, but I'm just glad that you guys are participating, so thank you. If we could continue to review the minutes, and I'll wait for a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept the minutes from the December 1, 2020 Oversight Committee meeting.
Anybody like to second?
I'll second the motion.
We have a second. All those in favor? We will do a vote.
For the record, may I ask for you to announce your name when you do the motion and the second, because I can't see the mouths move because of the mask.
Motion by committee member Louis.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard. Yes. Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Committee member Holt,
Yes.
Keller,
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, there's Ken.
Louis,
Aye.
Prince,
Yes.
Roland,
Yes.
and Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
I just want to make sure I saw Mr. Keller join us, that you have him as present.
I do.
With that, we'll go ahead and open for public comments. I was told that we have 2 speakers.
We have received 2 speaker cards. The first from Mr. Eddie Lane regarding Measure N funding.
I'm Eddie Lane with the Sierra Club. Do I take this down up here? I don't know what the rules are. Okay, thank you very much. Well, I've been here before, and many times. Today is a little different because when I came before, I had actual allocations recommended ahead of time. Well, that didn't happen this time. What I got in my email was the agenda, but it didn't have the attachment with millions of dollars of recommended allocations. Now, if we're going to do the public's business, the public needs to know ahead of time what this committee is being asked to consider. And that didn't happen. So I cannot provide comments. I mean, you've heard before the kinds of concerns Sierra Clubs have, and I'd like to do that. But I can't do that because the information was not provided in advance. This is not the way to do the public's business. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Lane.
The next speaker is Mr. Mike Turnipseed.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Michael Turnipseed, I represent Current Tax. And I agree with Mr. Lane. I did not receive any of the financial information either. I could not review it. So I am going to expressly request that you adjourn this meeting until proper notice of the proper information is given to the public. First request. Second request. As you move forward with Measure N staff money, there's going to be a problem with the police department. There are a lot of vacancies in the police department, yet Measure N is still, they're way under their 400 complement. They barely get to 400 if you include the academy, but those aren't even officers yet. They're not sworn. So they can't be really considered part of the city's complement. But I really think Measure N money was for a special purpose, not just for a place to leak money back into the general fund. And I hope that you discuss this matter and make a recommendation to the council that they develop a funding plan where the base 400 number is always funded out of general fund first, and any people in the police department that are over 400 will be paid for by Measure N. And another question that came up when I talked about it last night at the council, which is directly related, is one of the highest priorities of Measure N was crime. In 2019, there were 294 various shootings in the city of Bakersfield. In 2020, there were 472. That's a 60% increase. And the staffing, I know I was corrected last night because I was using January's numbers, but on the police force, it's likely tied together, we had a total of 441 filled positions, of which I now hear it's 39. The academy originally was 49, and now it's down to 39. Well, anyway, I thought the academy was 49. We have 39 of those people that are being funded and counted in the complement are at the academy. They're not sworn officers, and a number of them will not get through the academy. So why are we playing this game, and why aren't we accounting properly so the public can look at numbers and see numbers and know where we are? And we hope you make that representation to the recommendation to council too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turnipseed. Those were our two public speaker cards. So thank you for those public comments. I just wanted to open today with a couple thoughts and share with the public and also with my fellow committee members that we are frustrated, as you are, that we have not received the material within, a recommended 72 hours in advance, at least for us to do our part in reviewing the documents and being able to do what we were put here on this committee to do. I do, without it getting personal, I do feel like it's a disservice for us and what we were put on here for to do, to review the documents with enough time. I know that we may come here today and say, well, we can discuss it here and review it here live, but I feel like we were put here to do a good job. And I feel like without getting the information in advance to be able to provide comments, it really hinders the process. It doesn't do this process justice. And I would just like to hear from my fellow committee members if you had something to add to that topic.
Madam Chair, this is Ken Keller. If possible, can we ask for affirmation from the city's attorney that without the correct notice to the public, the meeting should be considered for being paused?
Through the chair to Mr. Keller, if we didn't have the materials ahead of time within the 72 hours of the notice of the meeting, then I would advise that we would have to, continue the meeting or renotice it. So in order to comply with that time period.
Thank you.
In addition, that it's also, you need to review it ahead of time to make your informed decisions.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from my other committee members. Yep, go ahead.
Sure. So I think I'm on board with kind of the sentiment that's going on here. And so when I threw my hat in the ring or put my name into consideration for this position, it wasn't because I thought I would be able to sit here and make the best decision personally as I got the information. I see each of us as, one of 9 fingers out in the community. And so when that information gets out, that's where we're able to talk to community members that deal with the different issues. Like I, for one, am no expert on any of this. And so it was said early on through this process, that we would never vote on something that was presented the same night. And I don't know when we got away from that, but early on, we would present, they would present, we'd talk about it, and then the vote would happen. That would give us time to go back to the community and find out, kind of different, different things about it. And so I would hope that we would get back to that. I don't know that that in and of itself isn't necessarily a Brown Act violation or what attorney's talking about, but just as principle. I mean, it's one thing is what we do, but I think just as important as what we do as a committee is how we do it. And that's where I take issue with what's going on.
Waylon, you said you had a comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Sanders. I also agree. I'm one that likes to look through everything in advance. It gives me time to think about it and examine it. And I also like to point out that it's if you look back into the minutes from the June 2nd, 2020 meeting, committee member Rowland expressed that next year he would like to allow the public to have more time to comment on items in the city's budget. So it's not something that we're just bringing up now. I think it's been an ongoing process since the beginning of this committee. And I know there are logistical concerns within the city getting the work done, but it's a foundation of getting the measure passed that there would be an oversight committee. And as has already been expressed, for the oversight committee to do a good job, this information needs to get out in advance.
Thank you, Mr. Louie. Mr. Rowland?
You guys have said pretty much what I'm thinking as well. I'd like to also address something that Mr. Crabtree said, and that is that the reason for the Oversight Committee is to make sure that the funds collected from a measure in sales tax increase went to 13 different priorities. And although that money goes into the general fund, I don't think the citizens and the taxpayers ever intended for us to fund what would be typical activities and positions within the city with Measure N money. Measure N money was supposed to be something special, something above and beyond the general fund. And so I also share the concern that we are leaking money from the Measure N fund back into the general fund and using it for what should be, for not what it should be used for.
Mr. Tobias, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to repeat what everyone said. I think this is not ideal to receive the information less than 24 hours before we're sitting here. I mean, these are multi-million-dollar decisions we're supposed to be making recommendations to the council about. Number one. Number two is part of it, Measure N was building trust and confidence in the community, and the community built or passed that measure based on certain requirements to build trust and confidence. One of them was this committee. So I'm not sure receiving this information so late is building that trust and confidence in the community regarding this committee or the Measure N fund. So I would highly encourage staff. I understand there's workloads to be considered and extenuating circumstances, but we really do need to receive the information a little sooner so that we can digest it and the public can digest it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tobias. Looking at the Zoom, I don't know if Ms. Perez-Andreessen or Mr. Prince would also like to add comment. I didn't want to leave you guys out of it.
Yes, thank you. This is Connie Perez-Andreessen, and I echo all the concerns from the other committee members. And, we received the information at 4:56 yesterday, not giving us enough time to review. I did reach out to staff on multiple occasions and ask for the information. So my request would be that going forward, staff commit to providing the information at least 72 hours in advance to give us time to review. We are all volunteers on this committee, and we all have full-time jobs and families. So giving us the information the day before is just not going to work for us to do what we were put on this committee to do. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. This is committee member Fred Prince, and I would just like to, not to sound redundant of what has already been stated, but I do concur with the comments that have been made by the other committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prince. Mr. Hibbard?
Thank you. So I see this as an opportunity. The committee initially, the reason I signed up was because I thought we were going to interact with department heads and experts and take the best ideas from the private sector and learn more about the public restraints and bring those two concepts together. There's an opportunity to do that today. You have presentations ready. Let's listen. I agree, I doubt we'll have enough to vote on things of this size and scope and scale, but I think it is an opportunity to learn where the direction of the city is headed, what's been happening since we last met, and what are the big items that the city is now focused on, so that then we can take that back, get input from other constituents within the community, and bring that back forward for a voting meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Hibbard. If there's nobody else that wants to have comment, I think Mr. Clegg has a response for us, or at least we hope you do.
Absolutely, Chair and committee members. I had thought about several comments for this meeting, and including addressing this topic that the committee has been bringing up. And so I'll reflect both, I think, on the concerns and I think to let it be a springboard for my similar suggestion to that of Vice Chair Hibbard, that we can provide our presentations. I think it would be a missed opportunity to not discuss some of the updates that we have today. And then it's the will of the committee to determine whether it would be appropriate to take action on items today. I would clarify really quickly first that, and if from the City Attorney's Office, Mr. Rugnick would like to clarify, I would welcome that. We have complied with our Brown Act requirements of having each of the agenda topic that we're going to be addressing noticed 72 hours in advance. I absolutely acknowledge and accept and receive the feedback that the more detailed information for the action items for the new business was provided yesterday, and that the committee wants more time than that. Absolutely accept that. But from a Brown Act perspective, we have noticed the meeting to be able to have presentations and conversations appropriately today with a 72-hour notice there. I was going to start today by talking about, we're here in 2021. I think back in the May and June timeframe when we were meeting and under some very compressed schedules, we thought by 2021 we'd be in a different place. And I was going to talk about some things that are the same and some things that are different this year. Unfortunately, many things are the same, but some things are different. Some things that are different, I think particularly this meeting as a mid-year budget update is different than the annual budget process. I think that's a very important distinction to acknowledge. The mid-year process is typically an update, a status update, and maybe some small surgical adjustments to the budget, but typically we don't make major changes at mid-year. Last year, you did that as a committee because there were significant additional revenues to PSVS that were unanticipated, and so you were making very big decisions last year. I think it's a little different this mid-year from last year in that sense. Some things that are the same is that we still are under the pandemic, and the surge over the December and January timeframe has continued to put significant constrictions on the organization. But I think you'll see today that staff has continued to work through on implementation of PSVS initiatives fairly remarkably amidst the pandemic for the past 6 months, and really for the past 9 to 10 months. Some things that are also different, fortunately, is that I think our fiscal outlook is more promising than we were looking at in 2020 in the budget process. And so you'll see some of that information today. that our fiscal outlook is looking better. It's still, there are still unknowns. I think that's something that's the same, is there's still many unknowns, and we need to be conservative and cautious, but I think our fiscal outlook is looking better. I would admit and acknowledge that some things are the same, and that we did not provide the materials to you with that 72 hours. And like I've already mentioned, I accept that feedback. We make a commitment as staff through the annual budget process that we will provide that information to you in advance. In fact, our schedule and vision, and we'll talk a little bit about that in our presentations, is that we would have an initial meeting with this group that would just be informational, and then that we would have a number of follow-up sessions, probably 2 sessions we think would fit within calendars, to just talk about ideas and hear from the public and go back and forth, and then have a final workshop that would then be a decision-making workshop based on many of the discussions that we'd had throughout that process. It is reasonable to ask for those materials 72 hours in advance. That is the typical process for our boards and commissions and even city council meeting, is that it's about that time frame, and it is fair to ask for that. I think that you'll see today that the scope of the recommendations is fairly narrow, but I respect the desire to have time to even consider that particular scope. Something that is the same, at least on the big picture, because I think there are big dollar amounts that we're talking about, the $15 million of one-time funds. That is something we discussed in our fall workshop. That's information that's been known and public, and I've stated multiple times publicly that I would recommend to this group and to the city council that we set those aside for reserves, and that we set those aside for our big projects like our ERP and our radio project. But I do respect the fact that we are talking about $15 million of one-time funds and another $1.7 million of ongoing funds. And we can work through our materials today and then make a determination about scheduling another meeting or however else we move forward. But absolutely anticipate in the annual budget process having lots of time to talk about issues and review materials. Something else that's the same, I would just reflect also, is that the challenges and priorities, I think, of the community are the same. Public safety is a concern. Homelessness is a concern. Cleaning up the city, our quality of life, getting to a better standard of cleanliness, and getting at our neighborhood parks and beautification, those remain the same concerns. And so I think the efforts that we're making as staff and the updates you'll see today reflect that. The surgical suggestion to add some resources towards homelessness and cleaning up the city is, I think, consistent with what we've been talking about, since I got here. And so some of those things are the same. I think what is different going forward in the budget process, as I mentioned, is our ability to review those materials and engage the public more. And we will see where we're at in the pandemic. But if we need to do that through some mechanisms like virtual town halls, I think we're much better suited to do that this year than we were last budget cycle, when we had to pivot quickly from March through May. So those are some of my thoughts at a high level. And again, I think both as a professional but also as an individual, I respect the members of this oversight committee. I respect this process. I respect the democratic process, and genuinely care about having the representation and the dialogues that are desired to be had. And I think there is an opportunity to share our information today and then see where we go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Clegg. I'll just note that, we've all been dealing with COVID in our own professions as well, and we've all adjusted. I would imagine I've had to adjust significantly in my own line of work and find ways to make my timelines. That said, I am happy to sit here and listen to your presentations as long as my fellow committee members are in agreement with that. I would suggest to everyone that we do not vote on anything today, and that we do either meet again before February 17th to discuss that and have time to actually review this on our own and for the public as well. That said, I will try to see if anybody else has any comments, and we will continue with the meeting. All right, with that, you're up.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. I'll invite Mr. Chris Hewitt to come and walk us through several aspects. First, an update on really where we're at, and then we'll look at our fiscal conditions and then talk about the things we think are worth doing at mid-year.
Well, good afternoon, committee members. Chris Hewitt with the City Manager's Office. Just give me a moment. We'll get our presentation popped up. For those on the Zoom, you should have received a copy as well if you're not able to view what I'm looking at here. So we've heard from our city manager today a bit, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more as we move through the presentation, but I wanted to provide a quick overview of what I'm going to cover today. 3 areas will be regarding current activity in the current fiscal year, including an implementation progress update, a fiscal update, and then what we were just talking about, which were some proposed recommendations that are included here that will likely be discussed at a future meeting. We're also going to talk a little bit about next year in response to the comments that we did receive during the last budget cycle from this committee. We did want to take this opportunity, although this is a mid-year budget update, to begin to look towards next year and better understand both how our overall budget process is going to look a little bit different, as well as how we believe this committee will play a larger role in that process, again, based upon the feedback that has been provided.
Mr. Hewitt, can I just stop you for a
Yes.
second? I do see that there are 25 participants on the Zoom. I'm just curious, is this open to the public?
I believe that
Through
the Zoom was was available for staff to attend, as well as the other committee members to attend.
So do we know who all the 25 are?
They all have authorized.
It's authorized.
Yes.
Perfect. Just checking. Thank you.
Again, we just touched upon this, but I wanted to rewind to July 1. The city has remained at near full staffing capacity despite the challenges of COVID. So trash has remained picked up, public safety calls are being responded to, all of those services that the community relies on are continuing to be provided. Cities up and down the state and across the country are in different modes of staffing capacity or different levels of staffing capacity. We know of several that have remained at minimum staffing capacity for the duration of the pandemic. But we have pretty robust mitigation and prevention plans in full effect. We've not utilized any widespread administrative leave. So again, what I'm going to talk about in terms of our implementation progress will reflect the fact that we have staff, many who are sitting behind me today, continuing to prioritize those measure priorities and ensuring that those programs, services, and projects are being implemented. I also have to pause to tell this group that the city was not necessarily expecting $34 million in CARES Act funding to come its way and have about 4.5 months to spend it. But our team was able to do that. And I'm proud to say, again, although not under the purview of this committee, that I believe over 50% of that funding went to support small businesses, individuals, and other vulnerable populations outside of those direct city costs that the city did incur. That includes about $6 million in small business grants that the city just wrapped up its programming of. So the staff behind me and the 1,800 or so staff members across the city remain committed to meeting the objectives of the measure, and I wanted to recognize them as part of this process for their commitment in doing so. So let's get into some of the highlights that have occurred over the first 6 months as it relates to Measure N, PSVS. I'm not going to go through every one of these bullet points. You've probably seen several of these before in some of our presentations. Talk a little bit about staffing, where we're at in terms of PSVS staffing. Talk a little bit about our public safety hiring and our enhanced PD recruitment efforts. talk a little bit about some of those expanded programs and services that we are working on, some project updates, and then what we're calling our effective government category. There were some, albeit maybe smaller dollar amounts that were allocated through the measure for some very specific activities that we believe will yield long-term, big picture benefits for the community. A little bit about staffing overall. We're at about 90% filled for all the PSVS positions that have been authorized over the last several years. That's great news. Our HR department has worked diligently with our departments to get those positions filled, and by filling those positions, obviously the city is able to capitalize on that human capital to get the various work done. Specifically in the police department, we have PSVS funded sworn positions filled through our academies. Our total sworn police staffing is 441. Again, that does include those 39 trainees in the academy. I believe that's one of the larger, or if not the largest academies we've had to date, and in part we're able to do that because of the new resources and because of the training center that was funded through PSVS. We do have 43 sworn vacancies in other funds in the process of being filled, and again, as attrition occurs, do not have a crystal ball to know where that attrition may occur, at what level, and then the domino effect that does occur. So there is a bit of an exercise there. Again, we've had PSVS resources that have allowed staff to fill specialized units, and a lot of those units are addressing some what I would call very localized and specialized responses. PSVS has also provided resources, again, to increase the net number of officers on the street. Without the resource, that could not have happened. That is a continued, ongoing goal of the city, is to put more sworn officers on the street. Talk a little bit more about how we're doing that. As the committee may recall, there's about $500,000 that's been budgeted this year to advance some enhanced police recruitment efforts. I'm pleased to tell you that we've established an applicant engagement team that's a partnership between our Human Resources Department and the Police Department. They are meeting weekly to talk through different aspects of the recruitment efforts, how we can improve those recruitment efforts, how we can improve processes and procedures, apply best practices, and ultimately streamline all the processes that are involved in bringing an applicant from the application stage, which I can show you there on the right side, essentially the gross number of applicants for police officer positions over the years, to actually being a sworn officer that has gone through the academy, passed all the tests, and is now responding to calls for service. A few highlights here that I wanted to mention to this group. There has been a recent focus to our neighbors to the south. They are going through some staffing changes down there, in part in light of COVID. And I'm not here to get into the details there, although what I can tell you is our HR department has worked with LAPD and essentially was able to cultivate 32 lateral applications, which is significant in the world of lateral applications. You do not see that normally. We have not seen that number historically. There are different processes and procedures we go through to evaluate those applicants. And I'm pleased to tell you that we have 9 of the 32 that are moving forward, I believe next week, to our civil service, police civil service board for essentially hiring, start that process. So that's great news. We're also looking at best practices throughout the industry. One of those low-hanging fruits that we've evaluated across many other departments is more targeted, standalone type of resources to attract and educate potential recruits. So again, I'm pleased to tell you that we've acquired the domain joinbpd.us, and we have a website developer that works specifically in law enforcement website development, recruitment website development, actually working to develop that website. And again, that is going to be, once it's complete, the objective and vision there is a one-stop shop for all things BPD recruitment.
I just have a quick question. Can we get an update on, I'm just commenting on Mr. Turnipseed's statistic, which I assume is correct, that our crime has increased. Can we get some statistics from when these hires, what? Right, well, maybe not today, but when we meet again, unless you have the information today, if there's a correlation between all of these new hires and the crime rate here.
Chair and committee, if I could take a first stab at that. And then I think through the budget process, annual budget process, I do think there will be a rich conversation around public safety. At last night's council meeting, City Council requested a specific workshop to the City Council on public safety to provide an update on crime numbers and also just what we're doing as a city. The factors that impact crime are multiple and complex, and so I wouldn't correlate necessarily crime with our numbers as they've gone up and down as we've added over the last 2 years, and then also seen some separations. And I think that the crime has absolutely seen an uptick throughout 2020. That I can acknowledge. The statistics vary across different crime types, and of course some of the geographies. We actually seen some crime types go down in certain areas of the city, but citywide across the board we did see upticks, and in particular violent crime is a concern for myself and for Chief Terry. We've been talking about some of the intervention methods that we can pursue this year to get at that. Crime is up nationwide. Crime is up statewide. All cities that have gun violence intervention programs like the one that we're beginning to implement through our grant and through those 2.5 positions funded by PSVS, despite their interventions. Point of order, please, Chair.
Can you please refrain from commenting out loud like that so we can all listen? Even those cities that have crime intervention programs are also seeing significant upticks in group gun violence throughout 2020, and so that's just to suggest that it's a challenge many are facing. That doesn't mean we're not going to continue to push hard on it and do new things. And I think we're actually uniquely positioned where some departments, like we've referenced, LAPD is constricting. We have the opportunity to be strategic with the resources that we have to implement, evidence-based practices that can make an impact. So would be happy to provide an update on that topic through the annual budget process, and would invite members to listen in on our, we think it'll be a March workshop on public safety that's presented to the City Council. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. And if we can, just limit the public comments. If you'd like a comment later, we can put some time in for you after the presentation. Thank you.
So moving along, I just wanted to touch upon, and we'll get into some of the operational impacts in just a moment. This is more focused on staffing, but again, as you recall, there were several positions added across the organization for some of those key priority areas that we talked about during the budget process. In the fire department, 12 positions were added. For rescue squads, 12 positions were filled. We established the economic development department. 5 positions were added. We have 4 of those filled pending the recruitment of the director position. Recreation and Parks Rapid Response Team, we augmented that team. 6 positions were added and 6 positions were filled. Code Enforcement Rapid Response Teams, again, 4 positions added, 4 were filled. We had some other miscellaneous positions that were filled through the last 6 months, and again, I won't go through all of those. And then we have several that remain vacant or in a recruitment or contingent status. Again, as you recall, we held a few of those technology services positions in contingency pending our fiscal circumstances at mid-year. And again, there are other positions just from a timing standpoint that we have not filled just yet, and that is in part based upon some timing of some of our programs that we're working on, as Mr. Clegg mentioned, as it relates to our CalVIP grant. may have seen the news. We have expanded the spot or gunshot detection system. And now,
Sorry to interrupt, Chris and Chair. I noticed there was a request from a member.
I believe we authorized an assistant city manager position as well. Isn't that correct?
that's correct. I apologize. I've got that covered in just a moment since it's bundled with a few other priorities.
Okay.
Yes, good memory. Body-worn camera project rollout is complete. All of our sworn officers are now equipped with body-worn cameras. Our department has utilized that footage in several posts and other public interactions that you may have seen. Happy to report again that those fire department rapid response rescue squads have been deployed again. Those were equipment and staffing that were placed strategically within the city to address some of the most busiest areas that receive calls for service from the fire department in an effort, again, to reduce that domino effect. One, to get obviously equipment to those calls quicker, but also reduce that domino effect of, now a station is, now equipment is taken up with potentially a medical aid call, and now you've got another station covering first in, and there's a domino effect that occurs there. Happy to report again that we've seen these rescue squads take a lot of that burden off these two stations and are essentially doing what we thought they would be doing. Our fire department and our chief, if you have questions about this, can chat a little bit more. They did retain their ISO 2 class rating. Again, there's a correlation between that ISO rating and the insurance and other impacts to the community, insurance rates. And so again, without some of the resources that have been added through PSVS, that rating has the potential, as they look at resources, manpower, and other factors to be adjusted. But again, I believe it's slightly increased. We talked a little bit more in the past about that regional public safety digital radio project. And again, this is a combined project with the County of Kern. This is a big project. This is going to replace essentially 25 to 30-year-old analog radio equipment with a regional radio system that provides more comprehensive, more advanced radio communications for all public safety staff. And again, that RFP process is more or less finalized. It is pending some final approval through the county. I think on our side, we pretty much signed off on it. So it's ready to hit the streets pretty quickly, we're hoping. Just launched what's called our Clean City Initiative. You may have seen the article in the newspaper, I believe a couple days ago. This was a program that was included in the budget, about $1.5 million. And that was geared towards launching programs, services, and projects that were really meant to measurably reduce the amount of litter that we see and the amount of bulky items that we see across the city, illegally discarded, and enhance the quality of life for residents. Happy to report we had the equivalent of 2.5 of the 6 teams launched last week. And in their first week, they picked up 520 bags of trash, 24 mattresses were removed. You can see some of the workers there in that picture on the right. 4 of the teams are made up of clients of the Bakersfield Homeless Center. 2 teams are from a firm called California Highway Adoption. So again, 6 teams, they're providing that 5-day per week cleanup. And again, those cleanup requests may come through the city's mobile app. They may come through email or phone. There are also hotspot areas that our staffs are aware of that will be in regular rotation for cleanup and review. We're also starting, and our Public Works is leading this effort, monthly bulky waste collection events. And there's actually, I think, one coming up this weekend on Saturday at 2 locations, one in the Northeast and one in the Southwest. And we'll continue to provide those on a monthly basis. It's another opportunity for residents to discard bulky waste, stuff that will not fit in their tan can or their blue can, in an effort to reduce illegal dumping. We know that sometimes the trek out to the landfill, depending on where you're at in the city, is not a short one. And this was an effort to provide some of these resources closer to the residents to make it easier to discard those items. First one was a success. Again, we look to have these every month. We're also looking to engage a bit more with Keep Bakersfield Beautiful, establish a Clean City Ambassador program as part of this program. So I envision as we get into the budget process, there will be more to come on this specific topic. We covered this in our last meeting, I believe in December. As you all know, the Brundage Lane Navigation Center opened in October. I won't go through all the details because I know we did cover that at length, but I am happy to tell you as of this week, we have 113 individuals that are utilizing the facility, and I think more impressive, we've had 14 individuals, because of those wraparound services, move from homelessness to a permanent housing situation. And that's really the intent and the goal of this facility, is to provide those wraparound services to get those individuals out of that cycle of homelessness. And our referral network partners are meeting weekly, so this was not just a setup and move on. There is continued dialogue on, again, how best we can continue to support and engage those that are coming through the facility. And I would also say, too, that there's an important connection to this facility as well as some expansion work outside of Measure N at our two other homeless centers in the community that just, again, both I think recently completed or are about to complete expansion projects, tying back to our rapid response teams as we're going out and making contact, and our police department is making contact. There's now a bit more resources there for those individuals, and so this is, again, part of that holistic approach we've talked about. Just some quick data from July 1 to the end of the year for our code enforcement rapid response team. They responded to 2,500 calls for service. They've cleaned up 846 individual sites, 493 tons of litter removed, and they've made 361 contacts with homeless individuals. So you'll see sites like this, unfortunately, but after our rapid response team goes in and contacts individuals, sees if they're willing or wanting to receive services, there's also the follow-up and the cleanup process as well. So again, a lot of good work that is being done by our rapid response teams. And again, as we go, yes, sir.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to know, those rapid response teams, can they make referrals to the Brundage Lane Navigation Center?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
And we're also partnered with Flood Ministries and others in the community to do that as well, as well as PD having that information. So it's a pretty holistic approach. One thing, again, that I'd like to mention with our rapid response teams is, again, they are out and about. They are responding to those complaints that are made through the mobile app. I can't emphasize that enough. That's a great first way to utilize their services. On the recreation and park side, again, we have rapid response teams that one was added this year. They have worked to address encampments in city parks since July 1, 16. Vandalism repairs, special projects and cleanups, and also litter removal as well, predominantly in the parks. 137 tons has been removed. I'd like to take a moment to recognize that they're not just doing your normal, homeless encampment type removal. They're also, again, addressing some of the vandalism and facility maintenance, deferred facility maintenance issues. And again, this was important as we talked to this committee and getting feedback from the community about having, the parks maintained at a higher level, having those issues that are reported being able to be remedied quicker, and that's happening with our rapid response teams.
Since they're out there in sometimes first contact, a line of defense, if you want to call it, or first contact with the homeless, I think it'd be important for the city to look at training the individuals on the rapid response teams to make a presentation to the people that they might come in contact with about the advantages of the Brundage Lane Navigation Center. So if that's not being done, I'd like staff to please consider that.
Thanks, member. That is a great idea, and that is essentially when we refer to the referral network, it's actually Rapid Response, Flood, and BPD and Mercy House are all members of that network, and they meet weekly, and there is that cross-training. It's been interesting because I will admit that as we envisioned code enforcement officers doing these rapid response teams, we didn't initially expect them to sort of become experts at making contact with homeless individuals, but that's what they've become because, you know, a big portion of their time is engaging, encouraging, offering services before the even cleanup portion begins. Go ahead, Jackie.
Member Rowland, we appreciate that comment very much. And as Mr. Clegg and Mr. Hiowat pointed out, we actually now have two flood teams from Flood Ministries that are exclusively contracted to the city of Bakersfield and travel with our rapid response teams so that we can ensure that we're having that engagement in real time on the ground. And Jim Wheeler and his team have been incredibly responsive and helpful. And they're part of that referral meeting that we have every Tuesday afternoon, and we get together and talk about what's working, what isn't, how can we better make sure that we're informing people in the field of what the resources are available, not only at Brundage Lane Navigation Center, but at the other 3 facilities in our community.
That is excellent to hear. Thank you very much for that update.
Moving along, I just wanted to touch upon a few projects that this committee reviewed early on in the process. There were a few local parks projects. One was a lighting upgrade or a lighting installation at the Beach Park Skate Park, something that our parks team had received some significant feedback on in terms of a need. That engineering work is underway. We do expect to be out to bid in March. There was also a set of different access improvements across several different park sites. Some of those were in that contingent bucket that we talked about early on, and we were kind of waiting again to see how our fiscal circumstances were. One that was not in that contingent bucket was some larger improvements at Patriots Park. And again, we expect those bids to be moving forward in March. We did have the 2 regional sports complexes that did receive some funding through the budget. On the Mesa Marin Sports Complex, that design is complete and construction is pending. And then on the phase 4 of the Kaiser Permanente Sports Village, again, as you recall, this is the larger multi-sport facility in Southwest Bakersfield that has been constructed in phases, and more recently the city received a grant from the federal government, and as part of that matching requirement, PSVS funds were allocated to that project. That design is complete, and we do expect the bid process on that project to be moving forward relatively quickly. So we're excited to see that move forward as demand continues to increase for youth sports facilities within the city. Wanted to touch a bit on street lighting. I know this has been a topic of discussion amongst this committee and our staff as well. We have the street light study that was underway. Our team, or actually a consultant, is working to complete that. We expect that to be completed mid-March. Again, in anticipation of that study being completed, we've got $1 million budgeted to begin implementation, so we can again move quickly from identifying those areas and identifying the needs across the city to actually going into design and then ultimately construction of new streetlights. And then we also have, I believe it's actually a prior year project, but it's $1.1 million to retrofit decorative streetlights that were not part of the first wave of conversion that the city did to LED. That project is underway now. There's an audit process with PG&E that takes a bit of time, but that is moving forward, and I do expect that to be completed relatively quickly. Affordable housing was kind of the other piece in terms of homelessness that we've talked about, and there's obviously a great need for affordable housing within the region. We had $7.3 million budgeted. There was $3 million that was allowed to move forward immediately, and I'm pleased to tell you that those projects through an RFP process have been awarded or are pending award right now. And then there was $4.3 million that again was held in that contingent status, but we do anticipate that moving forward based upon circumstances that exist today. So to get ahead of that, there were proposals that were received through another RFP process, and we'll be ready to mobilize that amount here quickly. Again, down at the arena, there were a few projects that were approved through the budget. One was a safety project for some rigging work, and that's underway right now. And then there were several prior year projects that are now complete. So hopefully as we can return to events in the arena here soon, as you walk in there, you will see that there are some significant investments that have been made to make that facility continue to be the top entertainment facility in the Central Valley. And again, that'll be everything from a new trade show floor to new paint in the concourse to new food and beverage opportunities there as well. So a lot of work being, it's not preferable not to have that facility filled with shows and fans, but it has afforded staff some time from a scheduling standpoint to get into that facility and do a lot of the work.
Mr. Hewitt, can I ask, how is the city spending, how did they spend that $3 million that was awarded for affordable housing? What kind of things are we spending that money on?
I may have to defer to Ms. Kitchen or others in the room on the specifics of that.
And the reason I ask is I think that that's an extremely important expenditure, and it's a topic that we need to address even further with further funding possibly.
Thank you, Member Rowland. I'm pulling up my spreadsheet. We have many with these different projects, so I can explain this in a little more detail. But for the first year of the PSVS affordable housing, we did receive 9 applications, and we were able to award the 3. The applicant for those were 2 for the Housing Authority, Stephen Peltz and his team, and then another for Chelsea Investment. It looks like we totaled around 200, close to 200 units between those 3 projects. They're located on Baker Street, 6th Street, and on Stein Road.
So are we paying for people to be housed? Is that what I'm hearing? Or
So this money is the capital. So it's the capital to actually build the housing units. We do have an increased need across the community for housing units, and that's what this fund is for specifically. In addition to that, though, I will note that over the last year, the city has taken in close to $40 million in rental assistance programs, both from CARES funding, state funding, CDBG, and others. So we're also working on increased voucher availability to ensure that people are able to stay in those units.
And if I may follow up, Member Rowland, on sort of going up to the 30,000 foot level on that comment, because I think you're spot on that there's a continuing need here. I'm not sure that this has been verbalized with this group, but as we talk about the sort of the pent up demand to reach affordable housing numbers in this community, based on projections that the city and the state know that we need those number of units, we would anticipate recommending significant PSVS dollars to the same bucket probably for several years into the future. I mean, we did $5 million in year 1. Some of those funds ended up supporting the Brundage Lane Navigation Center, and so we added the $7.3 million in this current fiscal year to sort of catch up to some of those funds that didn't get spent in the first year. But we would look at probably somewhere plus or minus that $5 million range to help continue to build these affordable housing units. To date, the conversation has mostly been about how do we build the units. It's largely that the Housing Authority and other partners that have the capacity to manage programs that provide some housing assistance, and through those vouchers, and there's actually not a particular shortage on their ability to do that, and so we haven't gotten into sort of that operation side of paying for people to pay their rents. It's largely about creating the units, and then there are entities that are well suited to maintaining those units. But there are some other thoughts and possibilities that we will be bringing forward in future years that as a separate project outside of PSVS, we've received state funding to help develop a plan and fund an affordable housing trust fund. And one of the options that we could take moving forward is to put our PSVS funds into this housing trust fund along with other resources, because it leverages and sort of you can build off of some of those allocations from the state and leverage those funds. There's more than one way to purchase units. We've largely done it by paying for entire projects. So we've done 3 projects for 200 units. But there are actually ways to work with developers in mixed income or mixed use developments to purchase a certain number of units as affordable units. And that's a way to continue to get more units and get them in more places in mixes of uses. And so there will be other concepts that we'll bring forward to this group and to City Council about how we might pursue affordable housing in other ways. But to date, it's been about funding construction projects.
I would also just add, Ms. Kitchen mentioned that there was 9 applicants and 3 were awarded. That totaled the $3 million. I'd be interested to know what the other 6 applicants were applying for in regards to funds.
And really quickly, I can report that those were similar construction projects, just building an apartment complex or building a multifamily unit. So it was similar to the projects that were approved. But that does, I think, what I hear you saying also is it signals that there is demand. There are other projects to be done. And, the additional $4.3 million that was held in contingency, we're excited and anxious to move forward in funding more of those projects on the list through that $4.3 million.
Madam Chair, if I could, this is Ken Keller. Quick question. We build who is it that we're contracting with to actually manage and run them?
I'll defer to Ms. Kitchen if there's additional information, but typically they have their own project management and construction management firms that manage those projects, and that's part of their application and our vetting process.
No, I'm sorry, the ongoing management of placing the people in the houses, the applicants and things along those lines. Is that all through the housing authority, or have we got a third party actually operating the housing units once they're built?
Member Keller, thank you for that question. Yes, you're correct. The Kern County Housing Authority manages a majority of those facilities. When they are the primary applicant for construction, they also have a robust case management team that helps ensure that clients or residents are put into touch with the appropriate vouchers to stay in the housing. In addition to that, there are private parties that also manage their facilities, such as Chelsea is one that's in town, and there's a couple of others that we can provide you a list in the future if you're interested in seeing who else is managing the facilities.
Thank you, ma'am.
Moving along, again, these were some of those other items that we had talked about that were maybe a bit down on the list in terms of dollar amounts, but we do believe are going to have some significant long-term positive impacts to the community and to the city. So first is that legislative advocacy. There was a lot of demand, I believe, and request for the city to consider more streamlined, I guess, and direct legislative advocacy activities. As the 9th largest city in the state of California. And so I'm pleased to tell you that proposals are under review right now for legislative advocacy services. Again, most cities do have a firm on hand to liaison and work on behalf of the city, both in Sacramento and in some cases Washington, D.C. There's also a program that staff has put together that's essentially an outline of the legislative objectives and positions that the city will have at its disposal, and City Manager Clegg may want to supplement that a bit more. But that program and those documents have gone to the Legislative and Litigation Committee. And we're actually in the hiring process right now for that assistant to the city manager position that committee member Rowland mentioned. And that process is nearing conclusion. In that position, again, it was budgeted for 6 months, so that's why we're getting now to filling that position. But that position will really help leverage some of these activities and provide a bit more capacity in the city manager's office to get at managing some of these areas, including our legislative advocacy programs. Another item that we're working on is what's called our long-range financial planning tool. And again, this tool is a program that is utilized to look out both in kind of the short term, but more so in the long term in terms of the city's revenue patterns and expenditure patterns, understanding the pushes and pulls of different potential decisions that could be made and how that impacts overall cash flow and assets of the city. And again, that tool is under development right now. We do anticipate having some more information or some more data from that tool available to us as we move into the budget process. We also have that 60-day reserve plan that this committee was very involved in providing feedback on initially. I'm pleased to tell you that that remains on track. We do have another allocation that we are recommending at mid-year that I'll get into in just a moment to continue to remain on track to get to that 60-day reserve amount. A risk assessment, we did receive those RFPs and we are expected to contract for that work this quarter. And again, this is an approach that we're taking to bring in a firm to review certain processes and procedures that the city has in place to make sure that the city is applying best practices if there's room for improvement. This will be a first step, a high-level look at some of those major processes and procedures. And then again, this will provide an opportunity to tweak what we're doing moving forward to again make staff and the organization a bit more efficient, we hope, and again, best practices being implemented.
And I notice, I believe, a question about, again, what is the risk assessment? And so if I may, Chair, and to the committee, if I could make a comparison to, I guess, everyday life, it's like going in for a physical to your primary care physician. It's a look at the organization broadly. It's not an in-depth audit like we do our financial audits, but it is essentially an audit, but a citywide perspective to look at, and they typically have 15 to 17 different categories. You typically have an audit or consultancy firm that would bid on a project like this. And they come in and take a look and say, how's our procurement process? Is it efficient? Is it effective? Do we have good policies and practices in place? Do we have good internal controls in place? What about our project management? What about our policy environment in general? What about our risk management policies and practices? Are they up to what would be a typical best practice in a city? So it really is a good look at to say, do we have areas in the city where we need to shore up a little bit? And it's called a risk assessment because it's based, the evaluation they're making is based on where we have the greatest risk. So they may come back and say, you're doing pretty good in these 12 areas or these 10 areas, but you've got these three to five that it probably deserves a little bit of a deeper dive at your, taking a look at your procurement process to determine if you could gain some efficiencies because you're using too much paper, or if you need some policy updates to be using modern practices. And so it's actually a fairly, compared to some of the budget items we bring forward, it's a fairly low cost way to have that second opinion come in and take a hard look at where we're doing things in the city and identify some areas where we might shore up our policies and practices.
In your opinion, where does that fall in the 13 qualifications for Measure N's funding?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think where we looked at that at last year. As I think about it from the big perspective, it's about fiscal sustainability and managing our risks, because and I believe that's where we allocated it, because under the city council goals, we actually listed this under our fiscal sustainability section, because those risk areas typically are the areas where you're not being efficient, you're wasting money, you are at risk of a claim or something coming forward that could impact the city. And so this is it's good effective government to help us remain fiscally sustainable.
Moving on to, there was a bucket of funds for employee development, and I'm again pleased to tell you that we've started to utilize some of that funding on the police department, on the command staff side for training. I do believe we have human resources Director Christy Tenter on the line if there are any questions around that program. Her team has also relaunched what's called our Real Leadership Program, and this is something that has been tweaked from some prior programs that we've utilized internally, but it's really meant to engage a broader cross-section of our team to, again, start to train the next phase or the next era, I would say, of leaders within the organization, again, using best practices that our human resources department has gleaned and implemented into this program. So I'm going to pause there. Our next section is the fiscal update. This will be just a few slides about kind of where we stand from a purely monetary standpoint as it relates to PSVS. And then I will defer to the chair if we wanted to pause maybe after this section for quickly before we moved into the next two sections.
I just want to make sure nobody has questions on that first segment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions. On the police department, on the staffing update, it'd be nice if we could see like what the original goal was. I believe it was 100 officers and where we are. You know, how far along are we on that? How many years was the goal? You know, was it 3 years, 4 years? I can't recall, but see the measurement of that. You know, more clearly articulated. You know, where we are on that, on filling those positions. How many are in the academy? How many actually are hired, et cetera. On the enhancement of police hiring, we had talked a couple meetings back about maybe some incentives on housing, and particularly I think I brought up the point of, you know, trying to have the police officers live in the communities they serve and get to know their neighbors, et cetera, and I think staff was going to investigate some of those, so it'd be great to get an update on that. Let me see, I think I have one other one. Oh, and then on the reserve, it's kind of the same question on the hiring. It'd be nice to see where we are exactly on that. I know we have a goal for a 60-day reserve plan, but again, seeing exactly where we are on that, some kind of a chart on how close we are would be nice. So,
absolutely, and I was predicting that question, so I do have that coming up in a slide for you. So a quick update on the fiscal position as it relates to PSVS. I want to rewind and go back to the year that ended, the fiscal year that ended June 30th. We talked a little bit about this at your last meeting. We ended that year with revenues in PSVS that exceeded some of our revised projections. Of course, there were savings from positions that were budgeted but remained vacant for a portion of the year, so there were some accrued savings with those positions. And then there were some appropriations within operating budgets that were not encumbered, reserved through a contract or other means, or expended. So when you total all that up at the end of the year, there was a fund balance within the PSVS fund of about $15 million. And again, most of that, I would tell you, is from the top two bullet points. Again, as hiring ramped up, and we'll see it now probably this year, there will, at least in that category, be a bit less savings. But nonetheless, $15 million thereabouts. Again, we did not use any of that funding to balance or augment the current fiscal year budget, so it is available and is sitting there in fund balance. We do have some recommendations that will be in the next section of this presentation for use of this one-time funding, and we will cover that in just a moment. Regarding ongoing revenues, I wanted to again rewind and just refresh the committee that we took a pretty conservative approach in our projections, and right in the middle of our budget process last year, we had to revise our initial projections for PSVS based upon the circumstances that were occurring at that time as it related to the economic shutdown pertaining to COVID-19. So not only did we revise economic or revenue projections, we also looked at ways within the budget that we could contain, or we could potentially create a bit more of a buffer. And so we did allocate, or plan to allocate, about $8.8 million to the reserve plan, and that's still on track to do that. There was about $700,000 that was held in general contingency. It's in the budget, but not necessarily allocated to one thing or another. It was meant, again, to provide some buffer. And then we talked, I believe, at length about both contingent projects and some contingent positions, but the contingent projects totaled about $7.2 million. So again, just to refresh on kind of where we started the year and some of the factors, and then now I'm going to talk a bit about what's changed. Initially, we did see some hits to our major revenue sources, including sales tax. So that first quarter, or that, the first quarter of 2020 is really when some of those economic shutdowns started to happen. So we did see a bit of a blip there, but since then, revenues, specifically in PSVS, have actually shown some growth when you compare quarters over these 2 quarters over the last year's 2 quarters. And then what we're really seeing is new vehicle sales, building materials, and online sales are really driving a lot of those increases. We look at 4-quarter trending because it gives us, again, that 4-quarter kind of annual running total of kind of where we sit in terms of our trending, and that's up as well. So as we continue to move through the fiscal year, we're pretty confident that we will be ending the year with a bit more revenue than we initially projected. That's even with some of the programs that the state has implemented that allow certain businesses to defer payments of sales tax. So again, good news there. So as I mentioned, we believe at the end of the year, we're going to end the year conservatively with about $4 million more than what we initially budgeted. Again, the city is in a position to move forward with those contingent projects that were already budgeted but just held in that contingent position. And again, we are planning on making some limited mid-year recommendations on priority issues that again will be ongoing in nature, but a bit below that $4 million number. So our next section is our mid-year recommendations, and this is really the both one-time and ongoing recommendations that staff will be making to this committee and ultimately to the City Council as part of our mid-year budget update. And I'll pause there to see if Mr. Clegg has any comments.
Yeah, and actually, we'd welcome any questions on just the fiscal status update. If I could overly summarize it, we remain very conservative, but we're in a good position. We have achieved all of our projections on revenues, and those have been even exceeded. I think it would be wise to remain conservative because of the unknowns of the pandemic, but there is an opportunity to consider some strategic, surgical adds. To that point, I mean, I think the direction from the committee is fairly clear to not move forward with actions today. I think we would invite the opportunity to come back next week if possible and revisit that, but I think it's still wisdom to walk through what we think would be those, suggestions so we could have that dialogue today, and then you have your time to let it simmer and also get feedback from the community. So if the will of the committee is to do that, we'd like to go over our recommendations.
Any comments from committee members? I'm in support of going forward. Yep, looks like let's proceed.
Okay. So again, our mid-year recommendations are our new or expanded staffing program services projects that were not included in the adopted budget that this committee reviewed last year. We typically don't recommend significant actions at mid-year. Again, I talked a bit about those 2 funding mechanisms, one being that fund balance, which is one-time funding, and those revenues that are exceeding projections. Again, from a conservative standpoint, that's looked at as ongoing funding. One-time fund balance, again, allows for those strategic investments in some of those large known projects that we see that are on the horizon, again, that are consistent with the measured priorities. What it also allows us to do, again, as we look ahead a little bit, is it allows us to maximize the use of the ongoing funds for priority projects and reduces what I call competition for those funds. So as we get into next budget cycle, we're not trying to bring you potentially, let's say, a $5 million request to add some money to what's called our ERP project in the budget cycle. we can potentially take care of that with the one-time funding, so it's not competing against, say, local parks projects, just as, again, as an example. So I'll quickly go through these, understanding that we're going to have a bit more dialogue in an upcoming meeting, but we are recommending, again, another $4 million addition to the city reserve fund. Again, that's to remain on track to reach that 60-day general fund reserve goal that we have in our policy. Another $3 million for the next phase of the digital public safety regional radio upgrade. Again, this committee recommended and the council approved a $9 million allocation to that project. We believe another $3 million is incrementally necessary as we start to move into the RFP, into the award stage. But we did not want to forget that this project will still need some additional funding once the contract is awarded with the vendor, and that's predominantly for radio and other units outside of the actual contract with the vendor. So again, just to give you some perspective there. The next one is a fairly large project. The city has what's called its Enterprise Resource Planning software. This is the main software system that many city functions flow through, from payroll, human resources, all of our accounting, budgeting. It all happens within this piece of software. And most cities, if not all cities, have a version of an ERP, and in many cases, private sector as well. The city's software is 25 years old or so. If you can think back to 1994, 1995, that's the software that we're dealing with, although you don't hear the dial tone when you're logging on anymore. And so in stepping back, the city saw this coming. Our finance team engaged the Government Finance Officers Association to do an initial analysis, a needs assessment, if you will. They spent quite a bit of time with our staff determining kind of what we have in place today, what our processes look like, opportunities, again, to implement best practices through a new ERP system. This is a critical piece of software. Again, it's behind the scenes. But it makes our staff potentially so much more efficient by having this new piece of software in place. It's not a short-term project. It's not a low dollar amount. What we're asking for in terms of a recommendation is a $5 million allocation from PSVS funding for this software. The project itself will likely exceed $15 million. We do anticipate that other funds will share in the balance of the costs. So again, as we look at the city as a whole, outside of PSVS, we do have, this software touches all those different funds in one way or another, and we are working on, again, kind of what that cost-sharing model will look like. We also have $3 million that we...
Sorry, this is Connie Perez. I have a question.
Yes, committee member.
The risk assessment that you discussed earlier, will that be completed after you implement the new ERP software?
Committee member and members of the committee, the risk assessment is a much nearer term project that will be completed likely during this fiscal year. It may push a little bit into summer months. It's typically a 3 to 6 month process. The ERP system is more like a 2 to 3 year project. Some cities have spent even longer than that, up to 5 years, but I think the longer you spend on time, the more you spend on money, and we'd look to push to do it more quickly than a 5 year time frame. But we wouldn't expect to have our ERP in place probably for another 3 years. What the risk assessment can do is highlight some of the areas for process improvements and streamlining that can be fed into the new system. You don't want to create, build a new system that follows our same old business practices that may have been built on older systems. It's an opportunity to go in and create, less steps and more efficiencies even in an ERP. And some of, I think, the follow-up projects that would come from our risk assessment would help us to have even a more effective ERP.
Thank you.
And then the next one-time funding item that we have for you is a $3 million investment into what we're calling quality of life beautification and neighborhood park projects. This $3 million will go towards projects that are on essentially a deferred capital list to enhance local parks. Our Recreation and Parks Department, our acting Recreation and Parks Director, Darren Budak, is here with us today. If you're interested in diving a bit more into the details of what those parks are and what those improvements are that we have recommended, we can do so today. If not, we'll certainly have those for you as we move the dialogue forward. But that really rounds out our one-time recommendations. Again, these numbers tie back to that $15 million fund balance. And again, we view these as, again, those one-time investments that can be made now.
I have another question about the parks.
Yes,
Can you
Committee.
let us know what specific parks this allocation will go to?
Yes, if you'd like that today, I can certainly have Mr. Budak come up.
No, you could just provide it before the next.
Absolutely, will do.
Thank you.
Mr. Tobias, the slide is for you. I wanted to give this committee an update on the reserves and where we do believe we will be at the end of the current fiscal year. I may need to call up Finance Director McKeegan to kind of give a bit broader context in terms of how this fits in within our target. But what I wanted to show you, and I shared with you these slides back in December, that because, again, of the foresight of both this committee and the council in adopting that policy, we're able to substantially invest in our reserves. And again, this is an insurance policy, as I see it, against a lot of the services and programs that we are implementing citywide. And again, good sound practice that the city is addressing. So when we look out towards the end of the year, and Randy, I will confirm that I believe that with the additional $4 million that we identified out of that one-time bucket, both the general fund reserves and the general fund PSVS reserves will be on target to meet that 60-day reserve amount in probably another, is it 3 years? I don't have everything memorized, I apologize.
Good afternoon. The current reserves are actually at 13% if we look at the 1920 numbers. So the actual addition of the 2021 figures gets us to 16.25%. So 2 months is 16.6. So we're basically going to be at the 2 months reserve after those 2021 numbers fund the reserves. So,
if I may jump in on the reserves topic, I think to this committee, I think to the City Council, a remarkable achievement in the short time frame to go from close to zero to meeting the GFOA requirements, and that takes discipline because consider all the projects that we could have proposed, but this is just good government, good fiscal prudence. The 60-day reserve levels, but with this additional allocation, meeting that goal this cycle would be fantastic. There are other types of reserves that can be considered, and I just kind of wanted to throw that out there for future thinking. We don't have any recommendations on the table today, but that is your cash basis reserve, because you should just have that much on hand in case things go sideways, in case there's an emergency, etc. You can also build reserves that are called risk-based reserves that you could say, if that bad thing happens, we want to still have that 60 days of working capital, but put another 5 or 10 million in the bank for, that rainy day fund to be an additional cushion. There's also known contingencies is a term that's being used more and more, which, like, for example, our ERP project is a known contingency. We know it's going to be $15, $20 million. We can start setting that aside today and have that held in reserve for when the project, is ready to implement. Same on the radios. There are other known contingencies. We know it's a challenging topic, and that it is not the responsibilities solely of PSVS, but our known costs for CalPERS costs that have a hill in those costs over the next 10 years. that's a known cost for the city as a whole, and so you see that PERS rate stabilization fund that's not, proposed necessarily, as I said, exclusively out of PSVS funds, but between the general fund and PSVS, does it make sense to set aside some funds for those known costs, because that allows us, again, to not have those significant impacts in future budget years eating into an annual budget process, because we've set the funds aside for the things we know we're going to have to pay for. And so this is, a great table, and it's great news. I think we're probably not done, though, even setting aside reserves.
If I may, I just have a request. If you could get me back, I would like to see what our reserves are compared to other cities in Kern County who do not have PSVF funds, right? And maybe like 3 or 4 cities, and include the city of Shafter. Thank you.
If I may suggest, Chair, I like your request. I think it probably makes sense for us to look at some other of what we consider some of our benchmark cities that may be outside of Kern County, because they might be more comparable in size and scope as a city, and so that I think that would help round out that perspective.
That's fine. Maybe just include those. I'm just curious as to how other cities in Kern, including rural Kern, are doing with their reserves. And I just wanted to include Shafter because I know they do so well fiscally. But yeah, include a couple other cities in the state. I'm just curious.
I have some comments. Regarding the enterprise resource planning software, you convinced me in your presentation that that is something that obviously needs to happen. Software that's 20 years old is like an abacus. So I understand the need, but my question is this. I don't think that anybody that went to the polls a year and a half ago and voted for the Measure In would stand there and say, they wanted public safety, they wanted economic development, they wanted the homelessness issue taken care of, and parks, beautification, things of that nature. I don't think anybody stood there and said, I'm voting for upgrading the city's software. So my concern and question is if Measure N had never passed, why haven't we in the past 10 years been planning for this software update in general funds?
Yeah, committee member, I think that's a fair question. I would approach that from a couple different aspects. Well, I think to just be candid with this committee and with the community, we couldn't do it from the general funds. It's just not possible. The budget's not available. Now, the general fund will share in some of the cost of the ERP, and we're actually, it's a separate process, but there's a smaller amount of year-end balance on the general fund side, and my recommendation to council will be to put that aside for ERP. And our other funds, our enterprise funds, our solid waste and water funds will also pay into the overall ERP. The city has forecasted this need, but just hasn't had the ability to set aside for it. Also, I would suggest that amongst, again, those 13 criteria, the fiscal sustainability piece, an ERP system will absolutely have its return on value and return on investment to the community and to the work of our frontline employees. And there should be efficiencies gained through that project. And I think it is one of the onus on city staff is to, as we propose the ERP, project itself and bring it forward, that we demonstrate what is the cost-benefit analysis of that system, what will be the efficiencies gained, and I hope that answers the question for the community and others as to what value that it does bring the project itself.
I don't question its value, and I think that it's necessary, and I'm not even certain that I would oppose it when it comes time to vote on that. I'm not certain that I will or won't. But anyway, I guess my question is, and it's not, you've only been here for a year, so I'm looking back going, what was the plan? To let the software fail 5 years from now and never upgrade the software? I mean, what happened in the past 5 to 10 years in order to get us to this point?
I would just briefly state that, as Mr. Clegg mentioned in the past, given the constrained resources, you have opportunity costs. And there are, again, decisions and deliberations that were made in the past about whether or not you allocate general fund dollars at the time to hire 2 or 3 more police officers, or hire another 2 or 3 firefighters, 3, 4, or start to allocate large chunks of money to a project like this. Not that it hasn't been high on the priority list, and we're not the only, I will admit, we're not the only city that still utilizes this exact piece of software. Do I envision it failing tomorrow? No. Does it cause great inefficiencies today that will generate additional capacity for staff, our existing staff, to do other work? Yes. And by doing so, again, I think the value to the taxpayer would be, again, that increased capacity that it gives to our existing staff to be doing other things, to be working on other projects, to be, again, meeting the goals and objectives of the community in other ways rather than trying to wade through additional steps in a 25-year-old piece of software.
Thank you. One other question regarding the Digital Public Safety Regional Radio Upgrade Project. Has the county funded their portion of that project yet?
I may have to, well, I can't speak for the county. I do believe, and I don't want to, I believe that they're looking to go through a financing or a lease program. I don't have all the details in place, and I don't want to speak for them, but that is the last I understood it. Again, I do know that RFP is ready to go. We're ready to go, and I know that our staff has been working closely with theirs on just identifying when that's actually going to hit the street. Greg, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Madam Chair, real quick, sorry. Yeah, I was going to ask that same question. My question was going to be, what happens? Do we have to have county participation in this? What happens? I know the county's having budget problems. If they decide, hey, I can't fund this, does that project fall apart and go away? Do you come back and are we going to fund the whole thing then, or whatever? That was kind of my thought or my question on it.
And it's a good one. From our perspective, no, the project in and of itself, the need for an upgraded radio system doesn't go away. We have not crossed that bridge yet, and I'm really anticipating that we're not going to cross that bridge. But nonetheless, the Bakersfield Police Department and the Bakersfield Fire Department do need an upgrade to the radio system for a variety of different reasons. And so again, if we did have to cross that bridge, we would evaluate what options would be available and likely be back in front of this committee. But again, we're hoping to get clarity here in hopefully the coming weeks and be able to move forward.
And the only thing I would add to that is that the city portion of the project is distinct enough that, yes, we move forward. It may impact some of our efficiencies and economies of scale, though, and so it may even change some of the dollar figures, and it may also just change the operational efficiencies and interoperability. So again, we really want, to move forward. There were good reasons to move forward the way that we did, but if it did change, we would still move forward, but it might change some of the dollars.
Okay, thanks. And then my other question was, on this section, was just reiterating on the parks. I would like to see the project list on the parks, and where I'm going with that is as much detail as possible, because I'd like to be able to differentiate between just kind of deferred maintenance, like, oh, we're going to pave a parking lot, versus actually enhanced activities or enhanced amenities at the parks. Thanks.
And if I could, to that topic, we'll absolutely provide those details. What we're basically working off of is in the budget process, following feedback from this committee as well as City Council last June, we asked Parks and Recreation to put together a list of deferred maintenance in park facilities that totaled about $8 million in projects that parks felt like, we had some deferred maintenance and opportunities for new playgrounds and, things that would improve the parks. And so we're really going off of that same list that was provided publicly back in last June, and we'll bring that list back up, but then be specific about if we did move forward with $1 or $2 or $3 million of one-time monies, we'd start at the top of that list and work our way down, but we can give you the first, 4 to 5 items that are on that list, and we can talk through that.
I'm just going to make a quick recommendation that we do our best to get through this before 1 so that we can conclude the meeting if we can. If not, then it'd be my recommendation for a continuance, and that all of our committee members try to be as flexible as possible with the times next week so that we can get the answers from today and wrap up the presentation. Thank you.
I will move quickly. Again, these now we're transitioning again a bit to our ongoing recommendations. Again, this is based upon those new revenue projections. And so I'll quickly walk through these. One is to add another code rapid response team. Again, as I mentioned, and as we will talk about a bit more, moving forward, the demand for these services continue to increase. The good news is, again, we've got now some other resources available to us in terms of sheltering to help those that are being contacted, but the demand is there, and our development services team can talk a bit more about this in more detail. But again, looking at adding another rapid response team, about $424,000 thereabouts in ongoing cost, and about $650,000 in one-time equipment purchases. Talk a little bit more about, again, that homeless priority, wanting to establish what's called the Differential Response pilot program with the Bakersfield Police Department in partnership with Kern Behavioral Health and Recovery Services. I may defer to City Manager Clay for a bit more about the vision for this program.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Chief Terry has been working closely with his team to look at what is being called differential response, and I'll define that a little bit more across several different factors. This is the concept of that, do we really need patrol officers responding to every issue that sometimes we get a 911 call or a non-emergency call for, and there may be other individuals that are better suited to respond to some of those calls, and it may free up our patrol officers for those highest priority issues. To just frame some of those possibilities that we're not recommending today, but that we may come back in the annual budget process. You can have, for example, social workers or behavior therapists embedded with some of our specialty units to be, going out with them to address some of those high sensitive situations, and then as they triage and determine that it's better suited for them to have that conversation, patrol can then, move on to other calls. Another example, excuse me, may just be having additional medical evaluation teams from BHRS working with our referral network and our rapid response teams and flood ministries to address individuals that may be experiencing homelessness. The one that we are recommending is that having a behavior therapist embedded in our 911 communication center, excuse me, to help triage some of those calls and to address some of those issues right there in that moment, as well as help determine those calls that maybe are better responded to by a different entity, and determining those ones that do need to be patrol officers responding to. And so we're looking at a whole spectrum of possibilities to better utilize police staffing time. This one particular one is something that has come forward as a possibility that we can move on sooner than later. BHRS is ready and willing to deploy one of their staff to our communications center on a pilot basis. Because it's one individual, it's not 24/7 coverage, 7 days a week, and we recognize that, but we want to see if this does create the efficiencies we think that it may, and if it does, then we might explore expanding that and leveraging, again, our other staff time. So that's the concept on this particular pilot, but wanted to paint the picture that there are other opportunities to, we think, be efficient in policing from that perspective, as well as just respond to some of the community interest in addressing some of those policing issues differently.
Then quickly on the other 2 points, again, currently there is downtown security patrol. that does help provide some additional resources to deter, several undesired activities, report issues to the Bakersfield Police Department, essentially get another set of eyes and ears out in our community. This item would expand that program, again, based upon the successes to date, to add some additional eyes and ears out there that will help the BPD in activating their staff based upon some of those issues that come in and patterns that they're seeing. We also have what's called the Downtown Waste Cleanup Team. Yes, sir.
Regarding that, the security patrol, can you tell me what the $100,000 would provide? I mean, an extra patrol car, how many times a day or a week and that kind of thing? As I understand it, this program has been quite successful. Am I correct? And
yes.
So if that is the case, you're very rarely going to hear me say this, but $100,000 may not be enough. Let's do more. That program has been very successful. So I'd kind of like to know what $100,000 is going to provide, and is that really enough? Could we even go bigger? Thank you.
As an initial response, we asked that same question, what's sort of the right tipping point? I think the demand is absolutely there from downtown business owners. I think we probably could go more. What this does, it expands the geography a little bit, because there are some businesses that are not included in the current program, and there's a desire to have a little bit more coverage. And that it does provide some more boots on the ground. I think we can come back with more details about, how many hours does that mean. But it is largely expanding the geography and then just having a little more intensification of time for some of our hotspots. That's what it's targeted for. We probably could go bigger. And actually, I think would welcome that, but we felt like that was at least a measured bite-sized chunk to consider in a mid-year process.
And then again, finally, the Downtown Waste Cleanup Team is out there every morning. It's a private contract responding to the needs in the downtown area to clean up waste. They're out there pretty early in the morning trying to get the work done before the normal business day starts. Through the experience to date, one of the things that has come up is that the boundaries were set initially to provide, again, an opportunity to in part evaluate how the program was working, but also because logistically it made sense with the resources that were allocated to this service. There has been a strong desire to expand those boundaries, and again, we'll provide a bit more information in terms of what the expansion will look like. But again, that incremental cost would be about $50,000. Moving forward, again, we talked about the Clean City Initiative, a lot of resources coming online there. I think this group and hopefully the community will again continue to see the fruits of the efforts that are underway to get ahead of the litter abatement and illegal dumping issues that occur across the city. What we're looking to do is potentially add what we're calling a Clean City Initiative Coordinator. It's really an administrative analyst within the Public Works Department to more fully integrate some of these efforts, both within the Public Works Department and the Solid Waste Division, as well as across the organization. Again, listing a few of those activities that we envision seeing this individual take on. I think one of the key ones is further engaging stakeholders, both to increase awareness of the services that are available and to make sure that, again, we're maximizing the impact of those resources that are out there working each day. So again, we see opportunities to align a bit better with KBB and with our Clean City Ambassador program that will be developed. I think the good news about this position is that we were looking to have it 50% funded through PSVS, with the remainder coming from the Solid Waste Fund. And so again, this I think is from staff's perspective, it would be a relatively small drop in the bucket from that perspective that gets to start to tackle some very big objectives and priorities with some really clear measurable results. Also want to look to implement a weed and nuisance vegetation abatement program. And this would be done through contracting with a private firm to support some citywide beautification efforts to tackle some of that overgrown weed or nuisance vegetation that you see throughout the city. Looking to address hotspot areas or areas that may need some attention, say after a windstorm or something like that. So again, some more tools in the toolbox, so to speak, in this case without adding staff, but to again get at some of these higher priorities that we're hearing about throughout the community.
Chris, before you move on, can
Yes, sir.
Through the chair, just quickly on this last one you talked about, I was happy to hear that the Clean City report earlier included some partners from the Homeless Collaborative. I think this might be another opportunity, if it's not too late, to maybe look that way and get bang for our buck on the 300,000. If we're going to have it done anyways, maybe put some of those folks to work.
Thank you. Again, these are just going to be some summary tables. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. Just showing you that from one time we're looking at $15 million. And then when you total up the annual costs for those ongoing, we wanted to be, again, fully transparent and show you what the annual cost would be. This is what we're looking at here right now for those ongoing programs.
If I may jump in at this point, Chair, because we are close to our time, and I think this is actually a good transition point. We do have some good thoughts about looking ahead, and those materials are in front of you. We have been thinking about what the workshop sequence would be for this committee in the budget process. We want to start in late March. That gives us lots of time ahead of May, and would look to have some general sessions and potentially even some issue-specific sessions. But I think we can return to that topic at our next meeting, since we would come back again. My recommendation and ask of this group is that if we could try to look to next week to come back and address the recommendation topics specifically, that would be greatly appreciated. And then we can, as we address those, we could then take this section of look ahead after we do that next week.
That sounds good to me. I would just ask that my other committee members, if you could be flexible with your schedule. I know that I am available as early as 7 on most mornings. If we can get some doodle poll options to start that early, I'm happy and willing to be here. Hopefully the public will too. And if there's no other comments from you, I'll leave any lasting comments from our committee over Zoom.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Fred Prince. I do have a question in regards to some of the implementation and some of the requests here. And I know some of the cities and municipalities across the state and nationwide, they are receiving funding, say from grants from either the county, the state or the federal government to help them in regards to these type of improvements. My question is, does the city have a designated, say, grant writer or application subscriber in regards to trying to seek funds statewide or nationally as well for these type of requests that are being made today?
Thank you, Committee Member Prince. Great question. The answer is we do not. However, one of the assignments for our new assistant to the city manager, in addition to legislative advocacy, will be to be in a coordination role related to grants. I want to be clear that we're not asking this individual to write all grants because we need the subject matter expertise of the departments to do that. But we will be asking them to basically be the watcher of these different grant opportunities and subscription services, and filter those out to the departments to make sure we're not missing any opportunities. And then also we're going to ask departments to inform this individual of any grants that they're seeking and wanting to apply for, so that we can coordinate efforts. And frankly, there are sometimes grants you actually don't want to apply to because they have some of these maintenance of effort or matching, requirements that don't make sense. And so that is on tap for this coming year. One request that, and we haven't even discussed whether this would, fit within the general fund or potentially PSVS, but we do anticipate budgeting a smaller amount next year to contract for a subscription service. There are a number of different subscription services and firms that help to filter, this grant information. And we do look to do that to assist the city manager's office in funneling that all in. So that is in queue, but that has not been in place in recent history.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prince. Any other comments? You could, I know, just give me 1 minute. I'm just going to wrap up our committee comments. Yep. In the interest of time, I did want to finish by 1, but since we have 2 minutes, I usually like to leave these meetings with public comment towards the end, even though I'm not required to. You're welcome to take the microphone.
Sorry for being late. It's midday on a Thursday. I have work. It'll be quick, but hi, my name's Riddhi, born and raised here in Bakersfield. So I'm going to start with our city manager. If our city manager managed to educate himself at all instead of supporting systems that uphold white supremacy, the city might actually see progress. And if our city manager ever managed to take high school geometry and is familiar with theorems, he'd know that upholding white supremacist systems would make you a white supremacist. You can either take that and learn and improve, or continue to be a white supremacist. I'll leave that up to you. Now let's look at the facts. Measure N was supposed to go directly back to the community. Giving that money to the police means you're complicit in the harm that unfolds on Black and brown communities because of BPD. A recent report last September showed that one of the most common citations given in Bakersfield was for jaywalking downtown, and 28% of those citations were given to Black adults, though only 6% of adults in Bakersfield are Black. Black adults are overrepresented in the total citations issued by BPD, as well as in nearly all of the top 10 reasons infractions were issued. Once again, Black adults make up 6% of the population, but comprise 20% of all non-traffic infraction citations. 19% of the infractions issued by BPD were for drinking alcohol on city street. Black adults account for 18% of infractions issued for this violation. The BPD is a racist, white supremacist agency. This is not a referendum on individual character of police officers, but nationwide, it's what they were built to do. Furthermore, on January 11th, an unhoused neighbor passed away because of the failure of this city. There are at least 4,000 vacant housing units just in Bakersfield, but 1,500 unhoused community members in all of Kern County. Using just $30 million, and as you saw earlier, there was $35 million used just for mid-year adjustments and over $50 million in the general reserves. But just using $30 million, you could solve homelessness in all of Kern County. Offering milquetoast neoliberal policies that do not get to the root of an issue does not do anything. You are using $20 million from the general fund, or from the Measure N fund, from the graph that I've seen, to give to the police, which is a disgusting use of funds that were supposed to go back to the community. Also, if our city government would pay attention, shelter-in-place hotels for unhoused people across the U.S. will not just be free, aka 100% reimbursable by FEMA. This reimbursement will apply retroactively starting from January 2020. Our cities have no excuses. Everyone can be housed right now.
Ms. Patel, thank you. That was more than 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody's participation today. It is 1 o'clock. I would look for the committee to motion for a continuance. Excuse me, we have one more.
Thank you so much, beloved. Perfect, sorry. Hi, my name is Dalton Jones. I'm one of the organizers with Faith in the Valley Kern, as well as the People's Budget. And I'm just here because this meeting isn't accessible to people. It's accessible to your committee. That's why we came and filmed this meeting, because we called a bunch of times and they said, oh, we don't have the access, we don't have the capability to be able to film this. That's not true. You can use it with a cell phone, like we just did. If you really want people, you really want the community to be here, make it accessible. You just did it with Zoom with your committee. So I'm asking the question, like, who is this actually for? Because the mayor's here, she work here, y'all work here, but the community ain't here. So who's this meeting for? It's not for the community, it's for y'all. to talk about y'all things. That's it. Make it accessible.
Thank you. Waiting for a motion to continue this meeting to next week, given a majority vote on doodle poll.
This is Barry Hibbert. I would like to make a motion to continue this meeting until a time next week that is agreeable to all of the committee members, for the majority.
This is committee member Rowland. I'll second that motion.
Thank you. All in favor, we'll do the roll call vote.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
Yes.
Committee Members Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Holt,
Aye.
Keller,
Yes, ma'am.
Louis,
Aye.
Prince,
Yes.
Roland,
Aye.
and Tobias.
Yes.
Motion is unanimously approved.
And if we could just get that poll tonight, and we will all make sure to give a time that works for everybody, or the majority, and if not, we can participate over Zoom. Thank you for joining us over Zoom, everybody. And the meeting is adjourned.